Imagine a world teetering on the edge of oblivion, where courage was a forgotten virtue and fear reigned supreme. In this era of iron-fisted rulers and trembling subjects, a beacon of hope emerged, a woman whose name would echo through the ages. She was not merely a speaker, she was a leader. She was not simply a follower, she was a warrior. Deborah, a prophetess, a judge, and a strategist arose when Israel's light had nearly been extinguished. But this is more than a biography of a remarkable woman. It is an exploration of unwavering faith, profound wisdom, and absolute obedience to the divine. Could Deborah's narrative hold the missing pieces to leadership and courage that you've been seeking? Could her impact on Israel's deliverance be even more significant than you've ever imagined? Join me as we delve into this powerful story, uncovering the surprising truths of how this courageous woman defied the odds, and how her resolute faith in God reversed the destiny of an entire nation. Are you ready to discover the secrets that make Deborah's leadership eternally inspiring? Let's embark on this journey together, revealing how Deborah's strength and divine insight irrevocably altered Israel's future. Deborah in the Bible, the judge who rescued Israel from ruin. The once vibrant land of Israel had been reduced to a mere shadow of its former glory, a nation fractured by fear, plagued by hopelessness, and burdened by the crushing weight of oppression. For 2 long decades, a menacing darkness hung over the people as they languished under the tyrannical rule of Jabin, the Canaanite king. But his was more than just a political regime. It was terror personified. Leading his formidable military was General Sisera, a name whispered in dread throughout the land. He was notorious for his unyielding brutality and his unparalleled strategic brilliance. Sisera's army possessed a weapon of terrifying power: 900 iron chariots. In a time when battles were primarily fought on foot, these war machines were like unstoppable, inescapable, and merciless tanks. Imagine standing on a parched battlefield, the earth trembling beneath the thunderous approach of chariot wheels. What would you do if every act of resistance was met with the unforgiving force of metal, fire, and the agonizing screams of your loved ones? For the Israelites, resistance seemed utterly pointless. Their strength had ebbed away, replaced by overwhelming fear. Their identity as God's chosen people seemed a distant memory from a more faithful past. But was their suffering simply the result of superior military might? Or did it stem from a deeper, more fundamental cause? This was not merely a story of military defeat. It was the bitter fruit of spiritual rebellion. Israel had once been a nation set apart, bound by a sacred covenant with the living God. Over time, however, their hearts had strayed. They worshipped false idols, sought counsel from pagan deities, and disregarded the commandments that had once defined their purpose. The Lord had issued repeated warnings, yet they chose defiance over righteousness. And as foretold, their disobedience led to their downfall. Isn't it a sobering thought how easily divine favor can slip away when the heart grows cold? Yet, even in their darkest hour, as iron wheels crushed their spirit and foreign gods clouded their minds, Israel cried out in desperation. Repentance stirred within their hearts, and from the ashes of their rebellion, a desperate plea for mercy arose. Their prayers ascended like smoke mingled with anguish, carrying with them the echoes of a God who had once parted seas and toppled insurmountable walls. And heaven, though silent for a time, had not turned a deaf ear. From within their deepest despair, God began to prepare a deliverer, a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. But few could have anticipated her arrival. She did not ride in on a war horse or clad in gleaming armor. She did not roar like a fearsome warrior or storm the enemy's gates. She came bearing wisdom, clarity, and a divine authority that could not be denied. Her name was Deborah, a prophetess, a judge, a woman unlike any other in Israel's history. Have you ever pondered what it would be like to be chosen to lead in a world that tells you leadership is not your domain? Can you envision yourself sitting beneath a palm tree, burdened with the weight of an entire nation's sorrows, while simultaneously hearing the whispers of heaven? Deborah's court was not a majestic palace. She dispensed justice beneath the shade of a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel, a humble place that became a sacred gathering point for those seeking truth and guidance. They arrived burdened with disputes and despair, but they departed with renewed vision and hope. She did not raise her voice. She elevated her spirit. Her discerning judgment cut through confusion, and her courage was forged in the crucible of unwavering faith. Where others saw only a woman, God saw a vessel of immense potential. Where men faltered in fear, she stood firm in divine clarity. But Deborah was more than just a judge. She was a divine intervention in a time when complacency had choked the spiritual life of the people. She embodied the essence of unwavering belief. While others trembled at the sound of approaching chariots, she stood still and listened for the voice of God. Would you have followed her? Would you have believed that the salvation of a nation could rest on the shoulders of a woman's unwavering obedience? Her rise was not merely unexpected, it was prophetic, and the events that unfolded next would shake the very foundations of Israel, revealing the extraordinary power of a single obedient heart. When God commands, go. One of the most unsettling truths about this chapter in Israel's history was not only the presence of a brutal enemy, but also the conspicuous absence of those willing to confront him. The silence of the men, the hesitation of the warriors, and the paralyzing grip of fear created a leadership void that echoed louder than the thunder of Sisera's chariots. For 20 years the people cowered in terror, yet no man dared to rise up in defiance. No sword was drawn, no rallying cry was heard. And in the midst of this deafening silence, when the nation's courage had all but evaporated, Deborah answered heaven's call. Can you imagine the weight of that moment for her? In a world where a woman's voice was often disregarded, where positions of authority were almost exclusively reserved for men, Deborah stood fearless and resolute. She did not seek leadership. She was not driven by personal ambition. She simply obeyed. Her prophetic calling and her role as judge were not self-appointed. They were divinely ordained. What would you have done in her place? Would you have possessed the strength to speak, to lead, to be the sole voice of clarity when the nation had lost its will? Her humility was her strength. Unlike kings who ruled from opulent thrones, or generals who commanded from war horses, Deborah led from beneath a simple palm tree, with wisdom in her eyes and the voice of God in her heart. She was not motivated by ego, but by an unshakable sense of divine purpose. Every word she uttered was steeped in prayer. Every decision she made was rooted in her deep relationship with the Lord. She became a conduit of heaven's will, an embodiment of what it means to lead from obedience, not ambition. As the cries of the Israelites grew louder, rising like crashing waves against the heavens, Deborah discerned that God's appointed time for deliverance had arrived. But this deliverance would not be achieved through brute force alone. It would begin with unwavering faith. It would require someone to ignite a fearful people with the spark of hope once again, and Deborah, chosen and surrendered, was that spark. Yet the deliverance Israel was about to witness would be far from ordinary. It would not come through the might of a king or the skill of a champion. It would be shaped by the steadfast courage of a woman whose strength was forged in spiritual intimacy. Are you beginning to grasp the power of this moment? What if you were the one God called upon, not because you were the strongest or the loudest, but because you were the most faithful? As Deborah sat beneath her palm tree, surrounded by the quiet stillness of nature, the silence was broken not by fear, but by divine revelation. The voice of God spoke with unwavering clarity, providing direction and an undeniable sense of purpose. A plan began to take shape, a sacred strategy to bring an end to 2 decades of humiliation. But it was not a vision to be kept secret. It was a call to arms, a divine command ready to be executed. "Call for Barak, son of Abinoam," the Lord instructed. He was a warrior from Kadesh in Naphtali, a man with latent potential, but who had yet to step into his divine destiny. Have you ever felt a stirring within, a sense that you were meant for more, but something held you back from rising to the occasion? Barak was living in that tension, and Deborah was about to ignite the dormant flame within him. Barak arrived, summoned by the prophetess. Was he filled with doubt? Was he driven by desperation? Regardless, he listened intently as Deborah, speaking not her own words, but the Lord's command, declared, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands." Judges 4:6-7. The plan was as audacious as it was divinely inspired: to confront Sisera, whose terrifying iron chariots had crushed every prior attempt at resistance, required more than just bravery. It demanded absolute trust in the seemingly impossible. This was not merely a battle strategy. It was a heavenly orchestration. Yet fear still lingered in the air. Barak's response revealed the feelings of many when confronted with the unknown. "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." His voice, though perhaps steady on the surface, trembled with the weight of uncertainty. It wasn't that he doubted God's ability to deliver. He simply lacked confidence in his own ability to succeed without Deborah's presence. Do you ever feel that way? Called by God but hesitant to move forward, unless someone stronger stands beside you? Deborah did not scold him. She understood the magnitude of the challenge he faced, but her reply was both powerful and prophetic. "Certainly I will go with you," she said. "But because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Judges 4-9. This was no ordinary response. It was a spiritual reflection, highlighting Barak's hesitation, while simultaneously revealing the unfolding of future events. Victory was assured, but it would not bear his name. Instead, it would be achieved through the most unexpected of instruments, a woman. But who would she be, and how would it come to pass? The answer would shock an entire nation and turn the tide of history. The atmosphere began to shift as Deborah and Barak sprang into action, not only mobilizing themselves, but also awakening an entire nation from its slumber, guiding it toward its divine destiny. The call went out across the hills and valleys of Naphtali and Zebulun. From the corners of villages, through mountain passes, and from hidden strongholds, men began to assemble. These were not seasoned soldiers. They were farmers, shepherds, ordinary men who had been crushed under the weight of oppression for 2 decades. But something had changed within them. Deborah's voice, imbued with conviction and clarity, had pierced through their fear. Her unwavering faith in God served as a spark, reigniting the embers of national courage. She did not rally them with strategic battle plans. She rallied them with faith. Standing before them, she reminded them of their heritage. Has the God of Abraham not delivered us from Egypt? Did he not bring down the walls of Jericho? Has he not demonstrated his mighty arm to save? Her words were not mere historical anecdotes. They were lifelines. With each sentence, the past transformed into a prophecy, and slowly, the people began to believe once more. As Barak stood beside her, once hesitant, but now stirred by Deborah's strength, he gathered 10,000 men, a number that had once seemed unimaginable. Can you picture them lined up along the ascending path towards Mount Tabor? Each step they took up the mountain was more than just a march. It was an act of faith. They carried swords that may have been rusty and wore armor that did not gleam like that of their enemies, but their hearts were no longer shackled by fear. Would you have joined them? Would you have followed a woman who possessed nothing but her faith, and a God who had remained silent for 2 decades? What makes this moment so compelling is not just the military preparation, but the revelation of the human condition it provides. Here, we witness the delicate interplay between faith and fear. Barak, once reluctant to lead, now steps forward, still harboring doubts, but willing to trust. Deborah, lacking an army of her own, becomes the spiritual general. It is a divine paradox. God was about to unleash deliverance, not through flawless faith, but through faithful obedience. Does it comfort you to know that God does not demand perfection, only your willingness to say yes? And now the stage was set. The mountain vibrated with the presence of a nation, choosing faith over fear. The valley below held the most powerful force the Israelites had ever encountered. The sky, still clear, witnessed a moment that would alter everything. From their vantage point atop Mount Tabor, Barak's army could see Sisera's forces arrayed across the plain below, a vast expanse of soldiers and iron chariots shimmering under the sun like menacing blades. The 900 chariots, symbols of Canaanite dominance, were poised to crush any remaining hope of rebellion. For decades, these monstrous machines had hunted down the Israelites, swift and merciless. Barak's army, clothed in hope rather than armor, seemed insignificant by comparison. Can you feel the weight of that moment? Would your knees have buckled as you gazed down from the mountaintop? But before fear could reclaim their hearts, Deborah stepped forward. Her gaze was fixed not on the enemy, but on the divine promise. With a voice as firm as thunder and as calm as still waters, she turned to Barak and declared, "Go. This is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" Judges 4:14. These were not mere words of encouragement. They were spiritual directives, perfectly timed and precisely delivered. Heaven had already set the stage. Now it was Israel's turn to act. Barak raised his sword. The 10,000 surged forward, cascading down the slopes of Mount Tabor. Their unexpected and relentless charge caught Sisera's ranks completely off guard. The general had anticipated surrender, not defiance. His chariots had always instilled terror, but now the tables were turning. Then, without warning, the skies began to darken. Thick clouds gathered overhead. distant thunder rumbled ominously, and suddenly, the heavens opened with a torrential downpour. The ground, once firm and dry, transformed into a quagmire of mud and chaos. The mighty iron chariots, once gliding with deadly grace, now became mired helplessly in the mire. Wheels spun and locked. Horses panicked. Soldiers slipped and fell, their formation collapsing like shattered glass. This was no ordinary weather event. It was an act of divine warfare. The God of Israel, who had once parted the Red Sea, now summoned a storm to fight for his people. Psalm 18:14 comes to life here. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning, he routed them. Nature itself became God's arsenal, and every raindrop served as a declaration that he had not forsaken his covenant. Fueled by divine intervention, the Israelites charged forward with renewed zeal. Barak's army became a whirlwind of righteous vengeance. They fought not with the confidence of seasoned warriors, but with the desperation and faith of a people who had witnessed heaven opening on their behalf. Every strike was guided, every blow an echo of prophecy. The once feared Canaanite force began to disintegrate, its formation torn apart by both the storm and the Israelites' swords. Sisera, witnessing the unfolding disaster, knew that the tide had irrevocably turned against him. Soaked to the bone, humiliated and stripped of control, he abandoned his chariot, the very symbol of his invincibility, and fled on foot. Can you see him now? A man who once commanded thousands, reduced to a desperate fugitive, scrambling through the mud. Was this not the fulfillment of Deborah's bold prophecy, that the honor would not belong to Barak, but would be accomplished through a woman? Yet, even now, the most unexpected twist was yet to come. The battle may have raged for hours, but by the time the dust began to settle, there was no question as to who controlled the field. What had begun as an improbable uprising, 10,000 farmers and villagers charging headlong into the teeth of 900 iron chariots, had transformed into a complete and miraculous triumph. The Israelites, once bruised and battered under Jabin's harsh rule, now stood tall on the battlefield, their voices echoing with victory. Shouts of praise and tears of astonishment mingled with the rain as they surveyed the muddy plains strewn with the wreckage of their once unstoppable enemy. Not a single soldier from Sisera's army remained standing. The force that had dominated Israel for 2 decades was utterly annihilated, its pride buried in the very mud that had betrayed its chariots. Barak, standing breathless among his men, could scarcely believe what his eyes were seeing. He had once questioned whether such a moment was even possible. But now, as he looked across the rain-soaked field, he understood what Deborah had always known. This was no ordinary victory. It had not been won through human courage or clever strategy. It was the result of divine intervention. The God of Israel had moved, and nature itself had joined the battle. Have you ever witnessed something so improbable, so impossible that it could only be attributed to the hand of God? Would you have recognized the miracle if you had been there? Barak certainly did. His earlier fear and hesitation had been replaced by awe and reverence. His obedience, however shaky at first, had been met with overwhelming grace. And then there was Deborah, observing silently from above, her garments drenched with rain, her face serene and resolute. The fulfillment of every word God had spoken to her now lay before her. She had believed when others trembled. She had declared victory when no sword had yet been drawn. She had led not with weapons, but with faith. And as she surveyed the battlefield, she understood that this was more than just a military victory. It was a declaration from heaven that God's promises still held true, that obedience still moved mountains, and that faith could still reshape the course of history. Yet, the final chapter remained to be written. Somewhere beyond the chaos, the defeated Sisera still clung to life, having fled the battlefield on foot. The once mighty general, stripped of his armor and his reputation, now resembled nothing more than a drenched, desperate fugitive. The symbol of Canaanite supremacy had been reduced to a stumbling man, devoid of an army, honor, or direction. His iron chariot, his magnificent stallions, all abandoned in the mud. Isn't it a sobering reminder of how quickly power can vanish, and how the strength of one man, when divorced from God's will, can disintegrate into nothing? Weary, disoriented, and driven by a desperate will to survive, Sisera stumbled upon a familiar encampment, the tent settlement of Heber the Kenite. The Kenites had a peace treaty with Jabin, leading Sisera to believe he had reached friendly territory. But assumptions can be treacherous, especially when God has already decreed the final outcome. There, standing at the entrance of her tent, was Jael, Heber's wife, a woman without title, armor, or any apparent threat. Yet, as Sisera approached, staggering with exhaustion, she held the final key to this divinely ordained drama. What emotions would you have perceived in her eyes? Compassion, caution. Could you have imagined that this woman, alone in her tent, was about to fulfill prophecy? Jael greeted him with disarming gentleness, her voice like honey concealing steel. "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." Her words were smooth, inviting, carefully calculated. Without suspicion, Sisera entered her tent, seeking refuge from the storm, his shame, and the wrath he knew was not far behind. She offered him a blanket, providing comfort to a general whose pride now lay in ruins. "I'm thirsty," he whispered. So, as we draw this story to a close, I hope you feel as moved as I do by the incredible testament of Deborah's life. It's not just a story about military victory, but a powerful reminder that courage, faith, and obedience, no matter how small or unexpected they may seem, can completely alter the course of history and impact generations to come. Deborah's story urges us to listen for that still, small voice, to embrace our own unique calling, and to trust that God can use us, just as we are to accomplish extraordinary things. What resonated most with you about Deborah's story? Do you see parallels to your own life, or challenges you're currently facing? I'd love to hear your thoughts, reflections, or any questions you might have in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation together. And if you found this story inspiring and want to explore more stories of faith and courage, please consider subscribing. That way, you won't miss out on future deep dives into other remarkable narratives that can encourage and uplift you on your own journey. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to connecting with you in the comments.